Hi, this is the second part to a much longer reaction. If you haven't seen it yet, links to it are in the description as well as the top corner of the video. Now with all that out of the way, let's continue with this then, shall we?
In 2765, the 265th Star League Heavy Assault Regiment was annihilated by a nuclear device smuggled into their garrison. And things got worse from there. All hell broke loose with the new Vandenberg uprising. 17 worlds from the Taurian Concordat broke away in open rebellion. Kerensky immediately traveled to the front and tried to disarm the uprising without further blood being spilled. These were, after all, his countrymen, fellow citizens of Star League that he was sworn to protect. He ordered local militia units to stand down, to return home, and to not support further conflict. Local forces increasingly refused, supporting the independence movement or really anyone who was giving it to Star League, which inspired similar defiance across the periphery. After all, local units had stood up to the big bad government, which flinched instead of annihilating them outright. Kerensky's unwillingness to absolutely crush them out of compassion resulted in widespread perception in the periphery that Star League had gone soft. The uprising quickly spread through the periphery, the magistracy of Canopus and the Outworlds Alliance. Garrisoned SLDF units awoke to find themselves surrounded by a very hostile and well-armed periphery. Some SLDF garrisons were attacked, some were functionally annihilated in well-coordinated attacks, while many others were surrounded and sieged by a civilian population tired of Star League oppression. A few even switched sides, deciding to join the periphery in an uprising, distributing their weapons and in turn becoming rebels themselves.
Okay. You know, this is... Okay, so one of the little tidbits that I think I remember hearing about Battletech, like, from what I remember hearing, somebody told me this, so again, I might be wrong here, but they said that Battletech was sort of like 40K in that certain advanced technologies could not be manufactured anymore. Like, they relied on these, like, ancient plants that just everybody agreed to not attack because these old plants, like these old factories and stuff, were the only places that could make these old ancient, well, not really ancient, but like these old advanced technologies, and nowhere else really had the infrastructure or capabilities to, like, build new, like, factories or something of the such. At least that's what I remember. Again, anybody watching this who wants to correct me, please do.
The SLDF desperately tried to contain the spreading insurrection, but to no avail. The periphery was now willing to pay an enormous price to push Star League out and free themselves from their oppressors. Suicide attacks were the most common tactic of the early uprising, and catastrophically effective. When a fueling vessel detonated inside the Star League battleship Nebraska, Kerensky saw, perhaps for the first time, the true strength of enemy resolve. They weren't interested in merely pushing garrisons off planets anymore. They were taking the fight to the SLDF wherever they were. What was initially sporadic suicide attacks and disorganized resistance blossomed into organized military resistance. From Amaris' military funding, the periphery raised some 50-odd regiments. Kerensky was facing an actual war and defended what he could. Kerensky nearly died as he took to the field to defend his headquarters, piloting an Atlas on New Vandenberg. This was beyond his worst fears. The Star League was now fighting its own citizens. Order was breaking down. This wasn't an insurrection or an isolated movement. This was a civil war, being spread horribly thin and surrounded by endless hostiles. Kerensky was rapidly losing territory and men, doing his best to suppress what was a substantial enemy dedicated towards seeing the SLDF fall. Star League Defense Force garrisons were cut off and unable to reinforce each other. Communications routinely failed. Sabotage and terrorism claimed warships, dropships, and jump ships. Governments concealed insurrectionist groups or disavowed them while funding them and at the same time wishing them luck. Kerensky was unwilling to use his full authority to crush the rebellion with maximum firepower. For total war against his fellow citizens regardless of their Star League territorial status was unthinkable, and with every victory the Periphery was emboldened. Soon enough, the Periphery quickly became a lost cause, with more and more systems declaring Star League to be occupiers and tyrants. First Lord Richard Cameron called on all the great houses to assist the SLDF in putting down what he saw as an open rebellion to his just and honest rule. The great lords in turn all refused, because this dumb kid had disbanded the High Council while pouting over Executive Order 156. The great lords saw the tax edict as the direct cause of the rebellion and reasoned that it was the First Lord's problem. After all, their militaries were diminished and far too small to help anyways. That's what the SLDF was for, they reasoned. This was a Cameron problem, and they'd hold off jumping in until Cameron had solved it. Meanwhile, Kerensky begged for reinforcements from all points, trying his best to protect what he could. He ordered all SLDF units capable of transport to move at best possible speed to reinforce his tenuous hold on the Periphery. The heart of Star League, the Terran hegemony, was emptied of its forces in a bid to reinforce Kerensky.
Oh, that's not going to go good.
Crews to man defense stations and garrison those worlds. By mid-year 2765, there were barely 10 SLDF regiments left in the Terran hegemony. Everything else was locked in garrisons elsewhere, unable to transport, refusing to leave their regional military district undefended. The SLDF never had to mobilize on this scale before, as this was an unthinkable nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
The Great Lords had been greatly offended by First Lord Cameron, and now they were completely uncaring as to the fate of Star League under his control. Accordingly, each of the great houses adopted a sit-and-wait approach to this period of massive instability, offering token assistance to the SLDF through transportation to the front and nothing else. Many lords were quite content to watch this play out, defend their own holdings, and prepare to deal with the aftermath. Many predicted this would merely be the beginning. Unfortunately, they were very right. The war with the Periphery had become a meat grinder the SLDF had not prepared for. By the end of 2765, the SLDF and the Periphery were in dire condition. Cut off, surrounded, and refusing to surrender, the loyalist SLDF regiments found themselves snuffed out one at a time, often enough with overwhelming nuclear bombardment. 13 entire divisions were glassed by nuclear fire for refusing to surrender or to join the rebels. Pleas from cut-off units went unanswered as Kerensky was himself desperately holding on to rapidly disappearing friendly territory. All he could do was listen as his forces died for reasons they couldn't grasp. By the end of 2765,
I feel so sorry for him.
Combat losses were so horrific in the Periphery that half the SLDF units originally stationed there had to be disbanded, as they were utterly destroyed. They could not be reconstituted as any meaningful fighting force. By the end of 2765, Kerensky had decided to evacuate the Periphery with the remnants of his task force. The general had no choice but to evacuate to the inner sphere and wait for reinforcements many months away. He had been sent into the Periphery as a policing action and barely survived with his command intact. He was wise enough as a general to walk away, to reassess and reinforce, and to recuperate what he had. He was content to wait until the time was right. The Periphery War was an engineered, unwinnable nightmare scenario, and Kerensky had the wisdom to see through parts of it. He waited patiently in the inner sphere, waited patiently to rebuild his forces with SLDF reinforcements from the hegemony and other military districts. As the surviving SLDF from the Periphery uprising trickled in, his intelligence of the situation developed. He made plans to go back into the Periphery, but only when the SLDF was ready. This would no longer be a police action. This was war. His plan was to reinforce first, replace losses, and bring up fresh manpower, then to systematically conquer the Periphery, destroying the rebellion and restore Star League's rightful order. In the end, it would take until January of 2767, a year and some months of hard campaigning, to even gain the upper hand.
You know, I can't help but... Wait, gain the upper hand? I was gonna say that, like, it seemed like it was just like the downward spiral of like a bad feedback loop. But wait, he actually started making progress?
The total cost of the Periphery Uprising and Rebellion to the SLDF was, at the end of 2766 and beginning of 2767, 106 divisions and 61 independent combat regiments.
Oh, jeez.
Additionally, 61 divisions and 6 combat regiments had been rendered functionally inoperative and disbanded out of more or less compassion. As catastrophic as that sounds,
joined rebels.
Slack-jawed as your veteran friends are right now at those numbers, dark deeds unfolding in the hegemony would prove the Periphery Uprising and guerrilla war to be nothing than a horrible distraction.
Oh no, what's going on next?
Now I have to wind back a bit and tell you about what had been transpiring in the hegemony as the Periphery burned. You see, Amaris' fuckery was advanced. While the Periphery complained, rebelled, and then openly warred against Starleague, the Rimworld Republic had been surprisingly and exceptionally loyal. Their military rounded up and executed traitors to the League. Their military expelled attacks from the Periphery. They had gone out of their way to be incredibly helpful to the needs of Starleague, and as such they gained a most favored nation status with the First Lord Richard Cameron. This demonstrated loyalty and greatness allowed Amaris to engineer a deal with the young Richard Cameron the year before. Amaris and the Rimworld Republic had pledged his significant military forces to assist in the event of trouble which was now certainly knocking on the door. By 2766, as stated, most of the Starleague Defense Force was fighting an unending insurrection in the Periphery. Most of the hegemony's outstanding garrisons had been emptied to feed necessary manpower and supplies to the war front. It is notable that even the bulk of House Cameron's own royal troops were diverted. As Richard trusted Amaris completely, the Rimworld Republic offered assistance in Starleague's time of need was, well, universally accepted. After all, each of the House Lords had refused to help, so Richard Cameron accepted the help of his close friend and trusted confidant, Amaris. Through mass mobilization, the Rimworld Republic sent an enormous number of units to garrison the now abandoned posts throughout the hegemony. Some SLDF commanders obviously saw this as a problem and tried to raise alarm as they were able, but the signature of the First Lord pulled a lot of weight. These troops were loyal. Under Richard Cameron's
so they seem.
The Rimworld Republic had free reign and total access to all SLDF defensive systems, totally integrating with the government and doing whatever they pleased, including gaining access to the Space Defense Network systems and the massive amount of armaments stockpiled throughout the hegemony. By 2766, half the damn Rimworld's Republic military had been deployed to the center of the Inner Sphere. For every SLDF division that left to fight on the front, 2 Rimworld's Republic divisions would arrive to reinforce the hegemony, the very heart of Starleague. Rimworld's forces trained and drilled in Starleague facilities, and availed themselves of all the intelligence coming in from the front. In particular, they paid very close attention to the Starleague Defense Force deployments and after-action reports. From this observation, they gained direct working knowledge of the SLDF, its order of battle, tactics, operational deployments, warfighting capacity, and accordingly, its weaknesses. Through integration into hegemony defense systems, they gained working knowledge of the space defense systems, the garrisons, and arm caches throughout the heart of the Inner Sphere. The armies of the Rimworld's Republic were perfectly poised for what would unfold. They took their time and prepared accordingly. With Kerensky far off fighting an insurrection and then open rebellion in the Periphery and the Rimworld's military at his back, Stefan Amaris had decided it was well enough time to act. After all, Amaris' life had led up to this very moment. Driven by
he's going to destroy everything.
His own ego, his own madness, and to avenged, imagined, perceived wrongdoing to his family, his destiny, and his house by House Cameron and Starleague, Amaris had acted to undermine it all. From 2753 onward, he worked to befriend Cameron, saying yes when others said no, being friendly when others chastised, supporting him when others refused. From 2753 to 2766, Amaris had been the best friend of Richard Cameron, there for him in any capacity, and behind the scenes he worked to destabilize Starleague from within. He pushed for the tax reforms that would in turn drive the periphery insane, and before that the edict to strip House Lords of their power, abrogating many long-standing treaties in the process. He pushed the periphery to the boiling point and then ensured a determined and stubborn general was there to feed their worst fears and not back down. Through this all, Stefan Amaris built trust in the First Lord by always being the voice of kindness, friendship, and benevolence. And on December the 27th, 2766, Stefan Amaris took the final step of his plan.
And what is
Stefan
this?
Amaris had such an enormous amount of trust in the First Lord that he was allowed to walk into the audience chamber with his personal bodyguard and no one raised an eyebrow. After all this was normal,
He's just going to
Amaris
shoot him
was
in the face,
often
isn't he?
seen doing what he pleased in the halls of power as he was a friend and trusted confidant of the First Lord. In fact, Amaris had brought a present, a gift in a carefully wrapped box. Richard Cameron accepted the gift like many others, finding underneath all that wrapping a jewel-encrusted, gilded, magnificent work of engineering, a laser pistol bearing the crest of Stefan Amaris, and in full view of all in attendance of the greater court, Stefan Amaris picked up the gun.
Okay. Wait a minute. So seriously, he's just going to shoot him in the face in front of everybody. Okay.
He raised it to the light, showed how the jewels caught the sun and sparkled, and as First Lord Richard Cameron sat there staring at his prize, Stefan Amaris smiled and blew his fucking brains out. And that's how you get ahead in the inner sphere. But a coup isn't just the removal of the head of state, or, in this case, the head of state's head.
Yeah.
No, the trick is to follow through, and Amaris was most certainly thorough. Over time, he'd managed to gain access to the palace's defense systems, as Richard Cameron had shown their operation in great detail to his bestest best friend many a time. However, Stefan had himself a fucking problem. The goddamn Black Watch.
Oh, who are these guys?
Let me tell you about the Black Watch. The Royal Black Watch, or 191st Royal Battletech Division, could trace its lineage back to ancient Scotland of Terra in 1725 as a volunteer militia for the purposes of keeping watch for crime. By the 28th century, they had significantly evolved.
Oh, okay.
In first terms, the Black Watch was no joke. They were not a parade unit. They were not a propaganda piece to scare people into leaving the royal family alone, and they did not idly bask in their royal regiment status. They were the chosen protectors of House Cameron, and thus the first family of Starleague. The Black Watch was not a bauble or a plaything. They were a ruthlessly loyal fighting force dedicated to their duty.
Oh.
They were a hardened group of warfighting experts given the finest equipment humanity could muster, along with the best training of any regiment in the inner sphere. In addition, each and every one of them were graduates of the Gunslinger program, which in Battletech is the equivalent of saying they're all pretty goddamn amazing at their job and
Okay,
spent
sure.
their entire military career in Special Forces level training just for instances like this. They had a single duty which they took very seriously. That duty was to protect the royal family. The royal family which Stefan had just decided to harm. When one of Stefan's idiot goons managed to trip an alarm in the throne room and get vaporized in the process, the Black Watch was alerted, activated, and immediately went into battle. That's not to say the Rimworld's Republic military hadn't planned to fight them. Amaris had been thorough. Amaris had ensured his best were armed and equipped for the task at hand.
But I'm going to take a wild guess to say that Amaris's best was not the same level as the Black Legion's best. Or wait, what were they? Black Legion? Was that what it's called?
Amaris's elite forces had expended an enormous amount of time and effort to train for the purposes of taking Unity City, securing Amaris's person, and eliminating any remnant of the SLDF forces on the planet before the day was out. For months and months, they had brought equipment and personnel to the region and trained for this day. They knew in full the operation and workings of the SLDF, their garrison strengths and battle plans. The coup required total suppression of all SLDF garrisons on Terra for this to work, and Amaris had reinforced his own forces to ensure total victory. Amaris's forces had in fact drawn up extensive plans to kill every last member of the Black Watch and trained
Black Watch, that was the name.
For a very long time to accomplish this singular mission with high efficiency. Unfortunately for them, though, the Black Watch was the stuff of legend. Immediately after the alarm was tripped, Amaris's goons almost lost their initiative as the first wave of Royal Defense troops jump-packed onto the roof of the palace and tried to breach to slay all opposition. While Amaris had the foresight to cause an HPG blackout, cutting communications off-world, the palace's alarm systems were sterner stuff. As first responders, the Black Watch Marine Infantry proceeded to assault the throne room. Their job was to secure the royal family, eliminate any threats, and get them away from danger, while the rest of the Black Watch powered up their equipment at nearby Fort Cameron. Cutting through the roof and throwing satchel charges, the Black Watch Marine Infantry assault teams almost killed Amaris right then, who did his best to hide and scream for reinforcements. Meanwhile, the 4th
Yeah, not so tough now that you have people shooting back at you now, is it?
Commander had a problem. He needed to get his main forces to the palace in Unity City, where Amaris's bodyguard was desperately fighting against the Black Watch Marine Infantry. The main issue was that between his position and Amaris's was the Black Watch garrison, which was now on full alert. All Amaris would have to do is get his 4th Dragoons into the city in force, and his coup would be secure. All the Black Watch would have to do is fight like mad bastards until the SLDF reinforcements arrived. And in this outcome, the entire inner sphere held in the balance. Amaris had prepared his men extensively for this very moment. They had the initiative, training, and numbers. They had all the data required to make this happen. All they had to do was to defeat a depleted garrison just now waking up. This would, however, be easier said than done.
Of course, yes.
The coup was not isolated to the palace alone. Amaris's men had set off explosives and fires throughout Unity City to wreak mass confusion among first responders. Amaris's troops had even the foresight to effect, as I said, a communications blackout before deploying a series of precision nuclear strikes on the Black Watch base as soon as the alert went up. With the nuclear strike wiping out most of Fort Cameron, remaining SLDF forces in the capital were down to just the Black Watch commander Hani Schmidt and her 8 mech warriors, who had just escaped destruction moments earlier by being on standby alert when things started to go to shit. Colonel Hani Schmidt was hard as nails, and she knew her forces were the only thing in the way to stop Amaris's 4th Dragoons from entering the city in full force. She decided to stop them for as long as humanly possible.
Oh,
she knew every
jeez.
second she held would be, potentially, to save the day. Every second she held might grant the Black Watch Marine Infantry time to kill Amaris, who they now had pinned down in the throne room. Every minute might give a chance to reverse the communications blackout and get an alert broadcast to the inner sphere at large. Every minute might give the royal family time to escape. So Hani Schmidt took her mech warriors into hell to buy time. And amazingly, for a time, she stopped the 4th Amaris Dragoons dead.
Jeez.
No matter what Amaris's lead forces with all
Nine-
their preparation, training,
just
advantage,
9
and numbers
robots
equipment
and their
threw at the
crew.
Black Watch. They kept coming. They'd nuked their base, and still, some of them had survived. They then threw wave after wave of mechs, tanks, infantry, and aerospace assets, which all bore down on the Black Watch, and onward the Black Watch marched, crushing and burning and destroying everything the Dragoons could muster. Dutifully, they fought, repelling every attempt of Amaris's forces to break through. They knew they had to buy time. They knew no fear but a job undone. Outnumbered and fighting like mad bastards, 2 lances of the Black Watch held up the entire 4th Amaris Dragoons. And so began the final stand of the legendary Black Watch
Oh.
At gorged flats with Puget Sound to one side and forested hills on the other, the Black Watch made their final stand, forcing the vastly superior numbers of the 4th Amaris Dragoons to engage them at essentially point-blank range. Desperately, the 4th Amaris Dragoons sent everything they had at them and watched in absolute horror as the Black Watch blew them away like dandelions. Wave after wave, some of the best Amaris had died to the Black Watch effortlessly, who cut them down with mechanical precision. The Black Watch held the line, hoping to tie up the Amaris Dragoons long enough for loyal forces to regain control of Unity City or at least kill Amaris. The 2nd Battalion of Amaris' 4th Dragoons were pushed into action and were nearly annihilated in an instant. 2 of the very best companies the RimWorld's Republic ever had were cut to pieces before they could respond or cry out.
Oh,
no matter what the
okay.
Dragoons threw at them, the Black Watch refused to die. Every single attack was repulsed, often with no survivors save the Black Watch waiting somewhere out there in the dark. Amaris was by this time panicking. This wasn't going down like it should have. No one was supposed to be this hard to kill.
Yeah, you'd think. I mean, at that point, where you have like, what do you say, 2 platoons or whatever it was? 2 platoons versus an entire battle group. And like, they're stopping the battle group in its tracks and killing them like they're not even killing. They're essentially like a block of cheese against a cheese grater. All they're doing is destroying themselves. At that point, you have to. It starts getting into your head that these people aren't natural. God, that would be absolutely terrifying. Okay, actually, you know what this kind of reminds me of? So this almost reminds me of, like, Leo Major. He was a Canadian soldier in World War II where, if you haven't heard of him before, he single-handedly, and I literally mean this, single-handedly, caused an entire, like, town's worth of German soldiers to surrender. He was quite literally nuts, and if you see some later pictures later in his life, he has an eye patch because he lost one of his eyes during the war. But basically what happened was, he was on patrol, and what had happened, he basically just scared them by making a lot of noise. Like, he stole a truck, stole guns, threw grenades as he drove around the town, shooting guns wildly, and just freaking the other soldiers out into thinking that they were, like, outnumbered until they all, like, surrendered. And if I remember the story correctly, when he's walking back to base, he has like these just 2 giant long lines of German soldiers in front of him, and as he just has like 2 guns just trained on them to make sure that that nobody tries anything. Oh, it's stuff like that. I mean, like in this story, I mean, like, you have this like, an entire army bashing against like this small group, and it's like, it is absolutely nuts where, like, you can have something like this, and it's like, that sounds purely fictional, made up, and yet stuff like it happens in real life.
Time was ticking down, and sooner or later SLDF reinforcements would arrive, potentially ending the coup. He saw all of his hard work, all of his family's hard work, his legacy slipping through his fingers. He urged his troops to do anything to stop the Black Watch. Desperate and running out of time, the 4th Amaris Dragoons lost so much goddamn equipment to the Black Watch that they had one desperate option left. The 4th Amaris Dragoons and their rushed reinforcements resorted to surrounding the Black Watch with sheer numbers, pinning them down with all the firepower they could muster, and continually throwing inordinate amounts of manpower at them to prevent them from moving, and then dropping a series of nuclear bombs on the whole lot, decimating their own forces in nuclear hellfire just to try to kill them, just to end the threat of the Black Watch. The last surviving footage of the battle shows the Black Watch commander and 4 remaining Black Watch mech warriors gunning down a RimWorld's archer as the double flash hit. Amaris' own 4th Dragoons barely survived in time to save him from the Black Watch Marines trying to cut their way into the audience chamber and gut him like a pig. As most historians will say, the Black Watch was technically destroyed that day.
Technically.
A handful of the regiment that still escaped all of that and survived. Yes, the Black Watch is that hard to kill.
Yeah.
Nukes are merely inconvenient. These
Oh,
crazy
God.
lads and lasses did not sulk for their dead comrades. They had work to do. They did not disappear as one might after a coup. No, they had a duty. From the irradiated rubble of Fort Cameron, deep from the bunkers beneath it, 5 members of the Black Watch survived. Under Captain Elizabeth Hazen, they would escape the battlefield to form the Ghosts of the Black Watch as a guerrilla movement in order to carry the fight on for generations if need be.
Oh, jeez.
They vowed vengeance upon Amaris. They vowed vengeance upon his people, his armies, his administrators, and his cause. The Black Watch would haunt Amaris until he died. And, well, some would suggest those who died in the nuclear attack were buying time for something far greater, trading their lives for the purpose of distraction. Rumors and later controversial evidence would indicate some of them escaped with an unknown number of House Cameron, disappearing far beyond the reach of Amaris. But I've covered that elsewhere.
Wait, have you? Oh, I gotta hear about that. So can anybody who knows what video he's talking about there, can you point that out or like talk about it in the comments? I need to see that.
Across the inner sphere, similar betrayals were playing out, with RimWorld's Republic forces suddenly decisively turning on the depleted, undermanned, and under-equipped SLDF garrisons. For many months, these garrisons had been emptied to reinforce Kerensky in the periphery. For many months, RimWorld's Republic forces had replaced their numbers, learning their way into defense systems and preparing for the day of betrayal. Amaris had, at enormous cost to him and his RimWorld's Republic, amassed an army of over 450 regiments to hold the hegemony. This army had, for the past year, slowly wormed its way into the hegemony and prepared with extensive training for just this very moment, a coup designed to be a sledgehammer blow against the heart of Star League. Often enough, RimWorld's forces would use nuclear or biological weapons in a sneak attack to ensure that the regular SLDF units didn't have any chance of retaliating or warning other garrisons. Suddenly, Star League forces found themselves overwhelmed by an enemy that had worked alongside them long enough to know their weaknesses inside and out. Massive nuclear bombardment was the reward for anyone who resisted. If anyone was capable of resisting with sufficient force, Stefan Amaris began using the threat of killing the First Lord, who none save Amaris knew was already dead. Faced with their lord being possibly alive, some garrisons would lay their arms down out of loyalty or hope that the First Lord would somehow survive. Others surrendered that day, seeing Star League as a lost cause and laying their arms down to save their skins. Many more died at their stations till their last, screaming for help that would never arrive. A bare handful, though, escaped to fight and resist for years to come. In a single day, Amaris had achieved his objective. Near total RimWorld's Republic control of many core Terran hegemony systems. Throughout the hegemony, RimWorld's Republic military operations struck with perfect synchronization, occupying SDS platforms and planetary defense installations. Throughout the heart of Star League, SLDF forces were surprised and murdered at their posts. In a single day, the majority of the hegemony was occupied by the RimWorld's Republic and Stefan Amaris. The orchestrated communications blackout had enabled the RimWorld's Republic to strike with near total surprise, and many months of preparation made transition of power nearly clean. Soon enough, the entire hegemony and core SLDF holdings would be under Amaris' thumb. One man now controlled 2 vast empires, and potentially the whole of the inner sphere as an usurper. He controlled, in theory, the banks, the FTL Communications First Circuit, the vast Star League bureaucracy, and the assets
how's this
of
going to
2
go bad?
tremendous empires. However, there was one last piece of business to attend. The rest of the family Cameron. You see, the Camerons were Star League. The Star League logo is their house seal after all. For generations they'd ruled it, run it, and for better or worse held it together. Amaris realized they were a threat and decided to sort them out in the traditional manner of an usurper. First, he gave them the chance of joining him, which some took after considering the alternatives. Regardless of what was promised or threatened, in the end, Amaris was fucking crazy. Once the killing started, he just continued on killing until they were all gone. With the last of their bodies on the cold throne room floor, he sealed it, turning the seat of humanity's power into House Cameron's final tomb. Throughout all hegemony territory, vast efforts were soon underway to wipe out any relic of Cameron rule or Star League. This was to be a new empire after all, and the old ways had to be ground to dirt. Through this transition, the great houses of the Inner Sphere took a neutral tack. They were smart enough to realize that eventually all governments topple, and on occasion new blood comes at the expense of old blood. As well, the great houses of the Inner Sphere were eager to see how this all played out. After all, in their eyes, House Cameron had this coming. The House militaries individually didn't have the power to conquer Amaris, nor did they have the want to do so. Amaris had not conquered their holdings, after all. In addition, there was an unsolved issue. The Star League Defense Force was the single most expensive military-industrial investment in centuries, and while their assets in the hegemony were now captured or gone, the remainder of the SLDF were still fighting in the periphery at this time.
Yeah.
It was soon clear that until the matter of the SLDF's ultimate loyalty was handled, Amaris only really ruled as an usurper. Until the SLDF was aligned to the rule of Stefan Amaris or disbanded, the permanency of the coup was still hanging in the air. The SLDF was waiting for news, having in the meantime conquered New Vandenberg and more or less gained an upper hand in the periphery. However, Kerensky sent news to the now deceased Richard Cameron, and he received no reply. This wasn't immediately a cause for panic. Kerensky knew Richard and he were on shaky ground at best. Kerensky knew the kid didn't favor him, regardless of why. And so, Kerensky waited. In January, news began to circulate about an HPG glitch in the hegemony, the first circuit of SL Comnat being seemingly crippled. While communications had been rerouted through secondary channels, the HPG traffic to the hegemony had not been restored. By late January, people began to notice in panic that no traffic from Terra was forthcoming. The hegemony central bank defaulted by failing to authorize routine SLDF wage and upkeep payments. It is known that in the event of HPG malfunction, the Star League government would revert to courier-handled communications traffic. However, every Star League courier sent into the hegemony failed to ever report in again. General Kerensky smelled a rat. He began to send his own scout ships to bring back news. Any news. But it would be Amaris who would break the silence. Amaris would declare himself emperor on 31 January 2767 in an open address to the Inner Sphere. He indicated he had usurped and replaced Richard Cameron, but left his ultimate fate unknown. It would take until February the 4th for it to reach New Vandenberg in Kerensky's ears. As self-proclaimed First Lord, Stefan Amaris' first official order was to try to get a hold on the SLDF and either gain their loyalty or keep them busy until he could neutralize them as a threat. After declaring Star League to be renamed the Amaris Empire, Amaris ordered as emperor for General Kerensky to maintain pressure on the Taurian Concordat breakaway region. He offered to make General Kerensky a very powerful man, offering to have Kerensky as his sword arm, to bring law and justice and order once more to humanity. Kerensky was no fool, for he had long suspected who Amaris was, and he realized what was going on. And so Kerensky made a choice that would change everything. Kerensky said no. Thus began the Amaris Civil War.
Wait, so all of that wasn't classified as the Civil War? The Civil War only starts now? Okay. To be continued. Oh, God. Oh, God. Okay, that had a lot of ups and downs. I mean, Granted, I mean, of course it has a lot of, like, the whole... a lot of, like, the pieces of, like, every great empire collapsing story, but still, that was... Oh, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to do part 2 of that. But, I mean, I'm looking... Part 2 is over 2 hours long. I don't think I'm going to be able to do a reaction to that in a single sitting. That's going to be horrible. So... Oh, God, yeah. So, yeah, of course, as always... Original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, and as well as part A of this react. Yeah, so like if you like this, subscribe if you have not, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.